Hello, wonderful La Mesa teachers. As you know, I'm Molly Keys, your behavior support specialist. Today for your video guide to your teamwork, I've put together something to help you join together the work that you've begun with restorative practices and the work that you've been doing with SEL. So the goal of this video is to provide you with some tools to bring SEL and restorative justice practices together through reflective practice and discussion. So there's going to be several points where I will pose a discussion question or a topic and encourage you to pause and talk to one another or reflect for yourself. So we'll start by reviewing the time that you spent with Jeffrey Newcomb Miller before we dive into connections to SEL, and then I'll leave you with a roadmap for the first steps in beginning to bring restorative practices into your mindset and classroom with a lens of SEL. So let's review what you already know about restorative practices. The quote below is a quote from Cheryl Graves of the Community Justice for Youth Institute. Pause the video, read the quote to yourself, and take a moment to discuss how the statement connects with what you have already learned about restorative practices. All right, go. Now let's review SEL. As you know, APS uses the CASEL competencies for social and emotional learning, seen in this overview graphic. These skills teach students important life and learning skills. They help students to regulate emotions, work on teams, make stronger decisions, and practice empathy. Most importantly, in terms of restorative practices, is that SEL is connected not just to the classroom, but to the families and communities around the school when it's most effective. But SEL and restorative practices are connected more deeply than that. Take a look at this detailed image of the CASEL competencies and consider what you know about restorative practices. Now imagine yourself in a school that practices restorative justice. Which of these skills would students learn by practicing in a restorative justice culture? Which skills might students need in order to benefit from or fully participate in a restorative culture? Take a moment to pause and discuss with your team. Think about using a restorative circle in your classroom, for example. If there's a conflict in your classroom that needs to be resolved, students who have experienced harm will need to be able to communicate effectively, identify their emotions, discuss the norms of the school community that were violated, and work with the community to solve the problem to come to a resolution. The student who has caused the harm, meanwhile, needs similar skills, as well as empathy for the student that was harmed, planning for how to make it right, and work to resolve the conflict. The skills of SEL are necessary for students to be able to participate in a restorative community, but the community also supports students in being able to develop these skills. One thing that came to mind the first time I heard about restorative practices was the big question of how to make this idea fit with the school community and how to really make it work with my team. In essence, how do we implement it? This graphic comes from Oakland Unified Schools, who developed a whole school implementation plan for restorative practices that is based on extensive research and practice in the schools. I want to look at the first 3 steps specifically for this presentation: framing restorative practices, assembling the team, and celebrating strengths to assess and assessing needs. I use these steps to develop the roadmap of internal work we're going to be doing today. For our personal roadmap, we're going to first reflect on our values. This connects to framing restorative practices for our site by first framing it for ourselves. Then we're going to consider our knowledge base. This is related to building a restorative team. Recruiting the knowledge of others through building a knowledge base for ourselves is like creating a personal team to support growth in restorative practices. Last, we're going to consider how we can fortify our own personal SEL. In order to teach SEL in the classroom effectively, we need to address our own SEL needs. This connects to addressing our strengths and assessing our needs, except instead of addressing it on a school-wide level, we're going to address it internally first. By doing all of this personal and internal work before rolling out to the school, we can strengthen our connection to restorative practices to help implementation. So let's start by taking some time to discuss values. My colleague Anna Kay and I have been working this idea of values into many of our professional developments. She describes values that each of us hold as a personal guide for our decisions and actions. When we are taking actions that are in line with our values, we feel fulfilled and happy. When our decisions are not aligned with our values, it can result in frustration, dissatisfaction, and burnout. So let's take some time to see how well our current values align with traditional punitive practices versus restorative practices. Pause the video and read the questions to reflect and guide a discussion. Once you have a sense of your values and how they align with your current understanding of restorative practices, it's time to honor your need to learn and recruit resources to act as your support team in this work. As your community embarks upon the journey of shifting towards restorative practice, fortifying yourself with resources and honoring your own learning is paramount. On this slide, you can find resources for researching and supporting your understanding of restorative practices. After this collaboration time, I encourage you to explore these resources and reflect on how the information connects to your values. When I went through this process a few years ago, I found that oftentimes my values around behavior and justice matched quite closely with restorative practices. Every once in a while, though, when I would become dysregulated, when I felt wronged or exhausted, I found that restorative practices felt antithetical to my needs. That's when I began to realize that I needed to work on my own social and emotional learning as a teacher and an adult. Once I did, I understood that in those moments when my values of restorative practices seemed misaligned to my needs, I was functioning in survival mode. Practicing SEL as an adult with intention helps to ensure that our actions are aligned to our values and our community's needs. With that in mind, I made an SEL self-assessment for you. This is a tool based on CASEL's adult SEL self-assessment tool. I simply modified it for clarity and ease of use. I want to reiterate that this is a self-reflection tool, not an assessment. Try to be as honest as you can because this is a tool that will help you to understand your strengths and needs in a completely private and personal way. Your strengths can become a support that you offer to others. Your areas of need are things that you can lean on others to support. So be honest and explore this resource in your own time. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'm always available to support you, so please don't hesitate to reach out. If you have any questions about the connections between SEL and restorative practices or how we can start working on some internal work to really help our work with restorative practices, please let me know. I'd love to help out in any way I can. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.